That the best you've got?
Extraordinary reports coming out of the Soviet Union. Tales of a being with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men.
As I said, Mr. President, of course I understand your concern, but I assure you the Luthor Company has this under control.
I don't blame those among you that fear me, for you've been taught to fear all your lives.
This is a world where the strong rule. And you are the strongest of all of us.
It is only a matter of time, very little time, until all of Western Europe is absorbed, is taken by the Soviet Superman.
Look alive, Lanterns. We've got incoming.
I'm honored to have you here, Ambassador.
Call me Diana. And what shall I call you?
Superman. You think you're going to stop me, Batman?
What now?
Now I save the world.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This is going to be my Superman Red Sun trailer breakdown. Most of you are at least vaguely familiar with the story if you never read it. It's a 2003 Elseworld story by Mark Millar, who just had this idea as a kid. What would have happened if Superman's pod would have landed in the Soviet Union back in the 1950s during Cold War Soviet Union instead of landing in Kansas? It's a great story, so it was only a matter of time before they adapted it into an animated movie, and from the look of the trailer, they're being pretty authentic to the plot of the original comic book. So we'll just break this down and explain what's going on with the story. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. We're doing a new round of that Flash Ring giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your favorite DC Elseworlds story on the video. There's been a lot of jokes recently that Warner Brothers doesn't know what to do with the Superman character. This is a fantastic Superman story, even though I don't know that I would want to see this live action before seeing other mainstream, main universe Superman movies. But the story picks up in the 1950s Soviet Union in the depths of the Cold War. Stalin is still in control of the Communist Party, but Stalin died in 1953, so Stalin does wind up dying during the course of the events of this story. You initially start the story thinking it's going to be a straight-up retelling of the original Superman origin story, but it's way twistier than that. There's a whole bunch of familiar stuff you see in here. Obviously, you see Green Lanterns, you see a Russian version of Batman who's coming for him Dark Knight Returns style, and you see a version of Wonder Woman that's looking like she's wearing a Russian version of her Wonder Woman costume. It is a bit of a twist on the Cold Arms race during the 50s and the 60s, but there's a big time travel plot that happens during the story too, so it gets way, way crazier than you would expect. But the Soviet Union just reveals to the world that they have the Superman, so everyone starts freaking out, and that begins the Cold War race. Jimmy Olsen is a CIA agent that recruits Lex Luthor, who's a scientist working at Star Labs to destroy Superman. As you see in the trailer, what he does is he causes Sputnik 2 to crash into Metropolis, so Superman diverts the satellite, saving everyone, but Lex Luthor uses that as an opportunity to collect some genetic material from Superman and create a clone that he names Superman 2. There's a whole subplot with Stalin's illegitimate child trying to seize power and get rid of Stalin. The Communist Party starts to order Superman to do more dangerous and dangerous things, slowly spreading communism around the rest of the world in the Warsaw Pact. He runs into his childhood friend, a Russian version of Lana Lang that inspires him to do good. Eventually, Lex Luthor and the US send the Superman clone after Russian Superman. They engage in battle, and it causes an accidental nuclear missile attack on Great Britain. The clone sacrifices himself, and then Lex Luthor winds up killing his research staff at Star Labs, founds Luthor Corp, and dedicates the rest of his life to destroying Superman. So all the main players in the Superman canon have a lot of the same relationships, it's just everything goes down in a very, very different way. They jump forward in time to the 1970s, and because of the influence of this Russian Superman, communism has spread everywhere. The Soviet Union is prospering, the US is on the verge of collapse. Lex Luthor starts working with a version of Brainiac to shrink the Soviet Union and get rid of Superman. It doesn't wind up working. Lex Luthor's next plan is to use the Russian version of Batman that you see fighting Superman in the trailer. That Batman winds up killing himself to avoid being turned into a robot, quote-unquote, of the state. They developed this new technique within the Soviet Union to turn people into, quote-unquote, Superman robots that just obey blindly. Things begin to escalate. Remember, this is sort of a metaphor for the Cold War and the escalation between the US and the Soviet Union in real life. Eventually, Lex Luthor's fourth plan is to use the new Green Lantern Corps that he finds. In this version of events, Abin Sur's Green Lantern ship crashes in Roswell, New Mexico, and he's found by Lex Luthor and the government. Eventually, Lex Luthor becomes president of the United States, marries Lois Lane, she becomes Lois Luthor. Then he helps found a Green Lantern Corps that essentially becomes the Marine Corps of the United States. So it's a bunch of Marines that become Green Lanterns. Soviet Superman launches an attack on the eastern coast of the United States. Lex Luthor sends his Green Lantern Corps Marines after him. There's even a subplot with Wonder Woman in the movie where she's actually trying to ingratiate herself with Superman. She starts to fall in love with him, but there's this weird thing where this version of Superman doesn't want to have anything to do with her. Not that he doesn't like her, it's just that he doesn't pay attention to her or give her any of the consideration that she wants. As the story follows the characters through the decades, eventually one of Lex Luthor's plots involves capturing Wonder Woman and using her to blackmail Superman. Superman is able to save her, they're able to defeat Lex Luthor's plan, but she finds during the course of their adventure that Superman just doesn't really care about her that much, so eventually she becomes kind of embittered and winds up going off to live on Themyscira. There are very few stories where Wonder Woman actually winds up getting together with a version of Superman. Speaking of which, we're in the middle of Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW with the live-action DC TV shows. They're doing Brandon Routh as Kingdom Come Superman, the older version of his Superman from Superman Returns, who's also kind of an older version of Christopher Reeve's Superman. Within the Kingdom Come comic book story, eventually after the death of Lois Lane, many years in the future, Wonder Woman, because she's one of the few people that Superman could be with because they both live so long, eventually do become a couple and have a child together. But you're just kind of left to wonder what that child's going to be, the child of Superman and Wonder Woman. Even just talking about it a little bit, I'm like, wow, why don't they just do Kingdom Come as an animated movie next? That would be badass. The version of Kingdom Come Superman that they've been doing during Crisis on Infinite Earths is sort of an amalgam of a couple different versions of Superman, so it's not straight up right out of Kingdom Come. And during DC TV, Crisis on Infinite Earths, they didn't really go deeper onto what's going on with the other Justice League characters within the world of that Kingdom Come Superman.
It's actually one of the least insane things I've ever heard. First, you stay and face Luthor. Then you won't do it alone.
Brainiac winds up turning into a much bigger villain and eventually killing Superman. So without Superman, the Soviet Union sort of falls into disarray. Eventually, Lex Luthor becomes this benevolent person in the history of the United States, leads humanity to all these future accomplishments. The story jumps forward billions of years later. In the future, Earth is being torn apart by tidal stresses from the sun, which has become a red giant. Lex Luthor's distant descendant, Jor-El, sends his infant son, Kal-El, rocketing back into the past. In the very end of the story is basically Superman's pod landing in the Ukraine in 1938, and it becomes this big predestination paradox. So the story of Superman Red Son isn't just a twist on the Superman origin story, it's also a big time travel story as well. And it's all about Superman realizing that he's not really meant to meddle in human affairs. The other big twist being that that version of Superman who came from the future technically is actually the distant descendant of Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the very person who dedicated his life to destroying him throughout his lifetime in the past. They don't list the release date for when this movie is actually coming out, but I would recommend you check out the comic book sometime between now and then. And if you do have the DC streaming service, they do post the movies there after the DVD gets released, but you have to wait a little bit longer after they drop on digital for that to happen. Everyone post your reactions in the comments below. Which other Elseworlds story do you want them to turn into a DC animated movie? DC animation tends to be pretty on point. What'll happen is there's a whole bunch of Star Wars stuff that I'm working on this weekend, a bunch of Mandalorian, so leave all your requests in the comments below, but I'll try to get to some Marvel and DC stuff in between that. Everyone click here for my brand new Mandalorian Episode 7 video, and click here for the trailer for the next part of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.